Straight coming from that media briefing by former President Jacob Zuma, outlining why he's challenging the Constitutional Court decision that found him guilty of contempt and sentenced him to 15 months in prison, but also outlining some of the processes that will now unfold in his bid to have that decision rescinded. Now, of course, that hearing will be happening on Tuesday, and there are other processes, of course, that were outlined by his legal team. Was flanked there by his daughter, by Advocate Dalimpofu, Senior Counsel, as well as Advocate Masugu, Senior Counsel, as well as a whole entire team of legal minds that are assisting in this particular case. Well, to help us unpack some of the things that are coming out of that briefing, but even more, we're joined by ANC veteran Mavuso Msimang, Jama-ah President Hanif Hendricks, criminal law expert William Booth, and political analyst Xolani Dube. To be a part of the conversation tonight, WhatsApp us your comments and your questions on 072-110-5584. You can tweet us at Newsroom405. We've also got our reporters down on the ground there in Nkandla. We'll dip in with them also in a moment. Let's begin with the panel here today. Msimang, let's open up with you and what your thoughts are of the challenge that the former president has outlined of the Constitutional Court decision. He frames it as the decision has got to be fair and has got to be consistent in terms of how the courts are handling this matter, and there shouldn't be particular laws that have been created for Jacob Zuma. Is this a unique situation that has been tailored for Jacob Zuma?
Well, thank you very much for inviting me as well, Tugali. And let me just start off by pointing out that it's important that when this incident at Nkandla is communicated, the impression must not be given that it's a national crisis. It isn't at all. There are disturbances in that place that are created by self-seekers, by supporters of the former president and people like that. There isn't. This country has gone through quite a number of crises on its path to freedom in the transition, and this really should not be characterized as such. It gives people an arm to deal. It supports the mischief, if you want me to tell you, that they are engaged in. The second thing that I need to say is that what is important, what would really resolve this problem, which shouldn't be if the leadership that we're always talking about exists, would be if the former president were to say to his people, to his supporters, thank you very much. I really appreciate your support, but whatever you do, act within the law. You may not break the law in any way. In action and in words, don't say anything that will aggravate my situation. I appreciate your support, but that's the other.
I'll come back to that, but Msimang, just hold that, because I want to just hear your views on how the president has reacted. But we want to take our political editor, Sibu Ngalo, who's live for us out in Nkandla. He was in that media briefing. Sibu, a lot coming out of that briefing today. What have we learned?
Look, well, Thabo, of course, this was an opportunity for the former president to state his side of the story and also perhaps explain his decision to go to the Constitutional Court. But if you notice, Thabo, that there is a change in tone, which is why I posed that question to him, where he is now appreciative of the Constitutional Court and is encouraged by the court agreeing to hear his case. Now, this is a totally different, markedly different from what we saw from when he wrote that letter to the Chief Justice Mogoeng, where he accused the court of partaking in a sham process and saying that it was a political gimmick, that request by Justice Mogoeng to answer, to give him an opportunity to answer, to say what kind of sanction should be meted out to him. But also, more importantly though, Thabo, I think we have missed, some people may have forgotten how the president actually, if he does not want to answer questions, how he evades those questions. And I think for most of tonight, actually most of those who posed questions will walk away here feeling that perhaps most of those questions were not answered satisfactorily. Of course, obviously, we did know, as the media, we did not want to offend, given the fact that we are there was a larger media contingent here, and also because it's also in his homestead, so you can understand those sensitivities. But I think, Thabo, going into the number of issues, the former president makes a point where he mentions Judge Pillay, for instance, but at the same time, while he mentions Judge Pillay was part of the 7 justices. Unfortunately, I didn't get to ask that question, but he does single her out, and I also could not understand how he then is able to agree with the minority judgment, but not what their decision was. But it looks like, but at the end of the day, what we had is a former president who's very unhappy with how he sees things unfolding, even comparing our democratic state to the apartheid government, which I think is quite a harsh comparison, but he makes it clear that it's about his own subjective views, Thabo.
Sibungalo, I appreciate you coming through tonight. That's our politics center. Sibungalo, live for us at Nkandla. Before the break, Mavuso Msimang, veteran of the ANC, calling what is happening there mischief. And but Mavuso, the former president, saying, well, I cannot take responsibility for the reaction of the people. He was asked very sharply to say, are you not going to use this media briefing to address your supporters, to say to them, we are under lockdown regulations, you are actually flouting laws, but also there are events and behaviors and activities that you've been carrying out, including the shooting of guns in there. Are you going to address that mischief, if you want to put it that way? And he says here, reaction of the people tells a story. People have been provoked, and they are choosing to express themselves in the way that they're expressing themselves. Words coming from a leader?
Is that still me on the floor?
Yes.
Yeah, no, absolutely. This, unfortunately, betrays paucity, a real leadership. You have responsibilities as a leader to make sure that the laws of the country are respected with respect to COVID, that the laws of the country are respected also with respect to law, keeping law, not breaking laws, and so on. People must come. I expect that he would welcome them, but he has an obligation to tell people that the organizers, to start off with, not to bring crowds of this nature. This is a huge crisis. Perhaps we will not see any no plan there, but the number of people who are definitely going to be infected by this third strain of COVID is humongous. I don't wish that it would happen if there was a shooting of 2-3 people there. That would attract a lot of attention. Perhaps the president and other people don't realize that the greater danger is caused by allowing people to act in the manner. So if he says people are angry, are provoked, therefore we must let them break the laws and expose them to infections, that's really terrible leadership.
Xolani Dube, let's bring you in here. Of course, we can't ignore that this is happening on the backdrop of ANC flags flying high, the president himself geared in his ANC colors, his daughter on the side, the ANC colors. We've seen many of his supporters as well in their ANC colors, but also a barrage of questions put to the president. For example, will you be attending the NEC meeting? For example, have you been in conversation with the top 6? Did you phone the president? The president coming out from the advocate Dalimpofu that the president is not opposing this particular challenge that the former president is bringing, neither is the police minister. What does that tell us about the politics that are playing out?
Look, first and foremost, let's accept that the institutions that are operating in our country post-1994 were the creation of people like Mavuso Msimang or Jacob Zuma, Thabo Mdluli, and the others. And so the mischief that we are seeing today is their creation, and so they must own up to it. They must not put a disclaimer. And the whole mischief that you are seeing in the ANC is putting our country into disarray. And Mavuso Msimang is still a member of the ANC. And I think they must own up to this mischief to say, South Africans, the 1994 elite transition was not an innocent one, but it was a negotiation exclusively for us, the political elite, to feast on the crumbs that fall from the table of the former colonizers and the oppressors. And so possible the crumbs are getting smaller. That's why we see so much scramble under the table, and they're dragging us to their own internal fight. And so this mischief is their own creation. They must own up to it. They must not put a disclaimer. And so also what is said about the black political elite is that when they don't find each other, they tend to bring the lives of the gullible, the vulnerable, to a serious crisis. And so this crisis is not Jacob Zuma's crisis, it's their crisis collectively.
So just tease that out for us a little bit more. How are you linking the transition of 94 to this mischief and therefore linking it to the ANC as a collective to respond to?
Look, you have to understand that ANC wasn't anointed or preordained the native administrators, and that's why today you see them in this predicament, because they never thought that at the end of the day they were supposed to be fully responsible for this democracy. They thought that the former oppressor would still be kind of their nannies, and then they would be just kids who symphone the whatever that South Africa will be offering. That's why I'm saying in this country, if you can see from the HIV and AIDS, from Marikana, from Life Estimate, from Xolani, no one was arrested, and no one from the Mavuso Msimang and the others ever stood up and said, guys, we are really devouring our own people here. Let's stand up and fight this devil that we are becoming of. But today, we are seeing them crawling out from their holes and telling us that our democracy is in a crisis, whereas these and others who place this democracy into this rabbit hole. That's why I'm saying, if we talk about justice, let's talk about justice in a blind format. Let's not have eyes. Let's say post-1994, things went wrong. How can we reconstruct our country post-1994? Because if we're still going to talk like this and put blame to certain individuals, I can assure you, we are not going to find each other. Mavuso and the others, Babu Mavuso and the others, let them humble themselves and say to South Africans, we have made mistakes. We went to the negotiations at your expense. Can we have a social contract that will include everyone, even from the village, everyone from the squatter camp, in township, in suburbs? Let's have a national dialogue so that we demystify and do away with what they agreed upon. Because as you can hear Ubabu Jacob Zuma and the others, it seems as if in Codesa, the lives of the natives were betrayed. And so today, this Mexican standoff is the result that says, if you are going to push me, I am going to talk, because I know more how we've betrayed our people.
Mexican standoff, that's what he calls it, Xolani Dube. When we come back, we'll get Mavuso to respond to that. But William Booth, I also want you to respond to what came out of that briefing. He says, just because it's called contempt, then it doesn't mean that I'm guilty. What does that mean actually legally in terms of what the president is his understanding of what contempt is? And Hanif Hendricks will respond as well. Does the president deserve a pardon I mean, seeing how he has displayed tonight, we'll get those reactions and get your reaction as well tonight on Twitter, 072-110-5584. In Focus continues next. All right, welcome back. You're with us tonight here on In Focus. Following, of course, that media briefing out at Nkandla by former President Jacob Zuma. Joining me tonight to unpack what was, of course, discussed and more, ANC veteran Mavuso Msimang, Jama-ah President Hendricks, criminal law expert William Booth, and political analyst Xolani Dube. Before the break, he revealed, of course, a number of issues calling this particular situation a Mexican standoff that is as a result of the negotiated settlement of 1994 that the collective called the ANC must take responsibility for and not issue a disclaimer on this one. But Mavuso, will come to you in a moment. But first, though, William Booth, I want to bring you in. A couple of things were said about the judiciary, one of which was the judgment was very angry. I think the words were used, that it was an angry judiciary, instead dealing with my utterances as opposed to dealing with the matter of contempt. But the other thing that was coming out, the question was put to the former president, you agree with the minority judgment as far as the sanctions are concerned, but do you agree with them having found you guilty of contempt? He says, well, you've got to ask the reasoning behind my contempt first and understand that just because it's called contempt, it doesn't mean I'm guilty. Is that the correct understanding of the law?
Absolutely not. I think one must go back a bit and just remember that former President Zuma had every opportunity in the world to oppose all these applications. So the matter at one point ended up in the Constitutional Court relating to whether he should or shouldn't appear in front of the Zondo Commission. The Constitutional Court then handed down a ruling saying he had to appear and he had to comply with filing certain affidavits. Now, he didn't comply with any of that. So that is an order from the court. So any person who doesn't comply with an order from the court can be cited for contempt of court. What then happened is the commission lawyers approached the Constitutional Court again, launched an application stating that Zuma was in contempt of court. In other words, basically, he hadn't complied with an order of court. So a simple analogy, if you are ordered by a court to pay maintenance to your ex-spouse or to your ex-children, and you do not comply with that order, then your ex-spouse can approach court and bring an application for contempt of court. And the court can then deal with the sanction. Then Zuma didn't respond when he was called upon pertaining to what kind of sanction he should receive. He made all kinds of comments out of court, attacking the judiciary, instead of coming to court, filing the necessary documents, instructing lawyers to oppose the application. He said, well, look, he hasn't got any more money. The point is he has now instructed lawyers to bring this application when he is confronted with a period of imprisonment. So all of this is quite unusual. Normally, applications for contempt don't end up in the Constitutional Court. It's been argued, well, it's not a constitutional aspect. But the point is he could have contested the fact that the Commission was asking for direct access to the Constitutional Court. So there are a whole lot of legal arguments that he could have brought to the court at various stages over a period of many, many months. He obviously could have gone and appeared in front of the Commission. And this is what I can't understand, and I'm a bit flabbergasted that he didn't get that legal advice. Because if he'd appeared at the Commission and merely said he doesn't wish to answer any questions because he is a potential suspect, then he has the same rights as an accused person, meaning he can remain silent. The Constitution allows that particular right in terms of Section 35 of the Constitution. So he had so many options, but he didn't exercise them. To come now with a whole, attack on the judiciary, having this kind of news conference about court proceedings is extremely, extremely unusual. I mean, what does the normal, ordinary person in the street have to say about this? Well, he's not going to come to court when ordered to go to court, and he's going to launch this blistering attack on the judiciary out of court. So if you have a problem...
But William he says, in fact, the whole procedure has been strange anyway. So I suppose he's continuing with that strangeness, saying from as far as the normal legal processes are concerned, they were never followed. For example, he says, when my sanction was considered, my state of health, my age, and the like, and mitigating circumstances were not even factored in. You were just given a sentence. He says there's a prescribed minimum sentence for contempt of court, but his was given an extra.
Well, it seems to be that he was given an extra, but he had the opportunity to present argument in court about the sanction. So normally what would happen, if you are convicted of contempt, the matter should be postponed and then the court calls upon you to address the court on sanction. But what happened here in April, a directive was sent out by the Chief Justice, Mogen, calling on Zuma to present factors relating to sanction. Maybe that shouldn't have been done at that time. My view is it should actually have been done after he was convicted of sanction, and then you have the sanction. But the point is, he had the opportunity to do this. He surely had the opportunity to present evidence to the Constitutional Court even though it might have been an unusual procedure to get the matter there, that he should have contested the direct access application by the Commission's lawyers, and then he should have presented argument on the whole contempt issue, and then he should have presented argument on what the appropriate sanction should be. So if you go to the minority judgment, the two judges all agreed with the rest of the court that he was in contempt of court. It was merely a question of what sanction. So I was asked this at a previous interview before the ruling on contempt and the finding pertaining to sanction. I had thought the Constitutional Court was going to convict him of contempt, but then possibly suspended that sentence, as it were, and then one of the conditions be that he appear at the Commission. And if he didn't then comply with it, well, then obviously the court would look at the fact that he's now breached a condition and then look at possibly imposing whatever suspended sentence, as it were, that had been handed down.
Right.
So
I don't know whether you got a sense. I mean, from what he was saying, it seems to me the president would still not go to the commission, even if he was offered that opportunity. But I'll come back in a moment. Hanif Hendricks, the former president Jacob Zuma, saying, sending me to jail during the height of COVID-19, the pandemic, it's the same as sentencing me to death. Is that a reason enough, a good and sufficient reason, that is, to give him presidential pardon?
Thank you very much. I am a member of the Sixth Parliament. I'm also a member of the Portfolio Committee on Justice and Prisons. We do oversight, and I recently did oversight on the prisons. So when you go to prison, you are then put into solitary confinement for 10 days because of COVID regulations. So that will happen to the president when he presents himself for imprisonment. I want to go on further and say that I don't have a quarrel with the Constitutional Court. However, it was definitely not a people's court. And why I say it's not a people's court is because the Constitutional Court didn't embrace Ubuntu. I'm also guided by my faith, which is Islam. And in terms of Ubuntu and Islam, you don't send a 79-year-old to prison. You find an alternative to imprisonment. And we need to focus on the issue. This is not a criminal matter. You should have had a civil expert to come and address us as well. And like I say, it's a civil matter, and that is why we feel that the Constitutional Court has erred. We also feel that the hostile media is pushing all sorts of angles, except that this is a civil matter, and they deal with everything else except contempt. The media deals with everything else except and this is in former President Zuma's plea at the moment. I am 79 years old. I am a sickly person. I am worried that I will be sentenced to life. Yes, he will be quarantined for 10 days to check whether he's clear of COVID before he mixes with other prisons. That is, the way the press and the media has pushed this narrative, it has thrown the whole country in confusion. We heard that the honorable criminal expert has given us a leadership. He clearly indicated, number one, that President Zuma, after he was found guilty, and I don't have a problem with that, he should have then been, a direction should have been issued by the registrar, just as they issued the direction now, and tell him, President Zuma, you must now appear and give mitigating circumstances. Murderers, everyone else gets that particular opportunity. When P.W. Botha, when he ignored the commission, the TRC commission, he was given a 65,000 rand fine. And President Zuma has been in prison. So the Constitutional Court, we don't have a quarrel. We respect the Constitutional Court, but it's definitely not the People's Court.
Not the People's Court. There says that Hanif Hendricks, William Booth, will come back to you in a moment. That clarity on the civil case, civil contempt and criminal contempt, and what is fundamentally the difference there. But Mavuso Msimang, let's come back to you today, Xolani, challenging the whole entire ANC, including yourself. He's saying part of these institutions, you were there when they were established, and you can't now put a disclaimer on this question of this Mexican standoff or the mischief, to say you created the mischief based on the agreements that were signed in 1994 that did not include all, including those in rural areas. And now these are people who are rising up against those agreements.
Yes, I did have a little bit of a disadvantage. For some time, I lost most of what you were saying, Mr. Dube. And so I guess what you're saying gives a summary of what you were saying. I don't know what the Mexican standoff is. I also do have a little bit of a problem understanding his fairly sophisticated, highly intellectual and philosophical analysis of these things. So in terms of what is before us, we have this: the Commission on State Capture required the former president to appear before them and present evidence because so many people had implicated him. I think he turned up and then raised the question of Zondo being conflicted, and that and asked him to recuse himself. I don't know much about law, but sufficiently to understand that the legal system here allows the judge to evaluate the request of that nature by the accused and decide whether they can recuse themselves or not. Judge Zondo decided not to. So there is nothing illegal in the decision that he took, and therefore Mr. Zuma should have then said, okay, I'll proceed under protest. He would have given his side of the story, defended himself against all these allegations that all South Africans believe he may be implicated in, guilty of, because he just never gave himself the opportunity to state his side of the case. How Zondo would have summarized this in the report, of course, is an issue, but these broadcasts were, these sittings were broadcast to the public, and People's Court talking about, people would have heard what Zuma is saying. I don't want to minimize it, but despite whatever conclusions Jacob Zuma would have, conclusions that Zondo would have come to, but Xolani, if I understood him, there is a serious problem in the ANC, in its leadership, and I do not take myself out of it. I wouldn't talk so much if I didn't consider myself to be part of it. And it all happened because one of the major reasons was that our people felt into the lap of corruption. And the corruption affected the implementation of people's programs. The corruption, especially the corruption that was at the behest of the Gupta family, who came here, promised to invest, and did what we all know. I don't want to go through all of that. That we now know, and it doesn't matter how much you argue about anything, that as a result of President Zuma's friendship with these people, as a result of him giving them the opportunity to run things, to appoint ministers, so they say, and all the things that you've all heard about, not only was a lot of money taken wrongly from the fiscus, but also the institutions, public institutions of program implementation, of development, were almost completely annihilated. You talk about the Transnet, talk about any one of them, you all know that. So that is the cause of our problem. The crisis that led to the establishment of this commission arises from the effect of state capture. Don't tell me that more was captured. Probably more was captured. You don't win your argument by saying so and so also did this. Let's deal with what has been very significant in the life of this nation, in the economy, and deal with it. So Jacob Zuma is being asked to respond to this. He really spurns these invitations, spurns them completely, and we end up with this contempt thing. I'm not quite sure what we would be expected to do other than to, we tried. When I say we, I mean members of the ANC. The veterans took positions, became extremely unpopular. We tried to raise these issues inside of the ANC. When it didn't seem to go anywhere, we wanted the public to know, in fact, that not all ANC people agreed with what Zuma and other people were doing. I don't quite know how much more one could do. I'm sure you always can.
These issues. Let's leave it on that point. We'll come back in a moment with Xolani's response to that as well, and take the conversation forward for you now here on Newsroom Africa, Channel 405. NC veteran Mavuso Msimang, Jama-ah President Hanif Hendricks, criminal law expert William Booth, and political analyst Xolani Dube. They are part of the conversation tonight. See some of your tweets and your WhatsApp messages. We'll get to them in a moment. Xolani, Mavuso saying we tried. In fact, some of us spoke within the ANC to raise some of these issues, that not all of us are like this.
Look, I think they failed because they speak with forked tongue. You know, today we see Maharaj telling us about morals, ethics, corruption, and this, and also that we have to respect the institutions of this country, forgetting that these are the people who ignited this thing when they were claiming that Bulelani Ngcuka is a spy, when they were evading and running away from accountability with Mo Sheikh. Today, they are at the forefront, telling us South Africans that these institutions are supposed to be respected. But then, it's them who are telling us that these institutions are no longer representing the interests of the South Africans, but they represent the interests of certain people. Then it was Thabo Mdluli who was the target, and the others, you know. And those people led us to Bulugwane. Today, the same people who told us about the roads and how these institutions have been captured, they are telling us that, no, everything is fine, because today Zuma is not on their side. It was Blade Nzimande, Vavi, and all of them, remember in Pietermaritzburg, who were telling us that these judges are the judges who's got interest, or our judiciary is being captured by the interest of apartheid operatives. They were telling us lots of so-called pre-Cold War slogans and so forth, telling us how much we have to undermine the current post-1994 state organs. Yeah. But today, they are telling us that, look, guys, these state organs are immaculate. They are there for us. But what is very interesting, at the center, Jacob Zuma, since 2005, even today, he's still maintaining that these institutions are not honest to us as South Africans. And so now, if the leaders of the ANC once were telling us these things, and some of these ANC leaders are saying the same thing today, like your Ace Mahashule, let me tell you something. We as South Africans, we get confused. But the point of convergence from Blade, from Ace Mahashule, from Mosheke and Mek Maharaj is that these institutions are not serving the interest of the South African natives. And so that's what they are telling us each and every day when they fight, when they have their own internal squabbles. Right. And what that leave us? It leaves us to the conclusion that says, it seems as if these guys, the so-called the ANC, they don't have an interest of the South Africans at heart. And so the rabbit hole that we find ourselves in today to discuss about the issue of Jacob Zuma and the others is their own creation. I can assure you, in future, we'll be discussing about how Cyril Ramaphosa take our resources and give it to the so-called the international white monopoly capital. It won't be us. It will be the ANC leaders who will be pushing that particular narrative. That's why I'm saying South African, especially the South African natives, they must start to say, look, we are no longer going to be abused by you guys. We have to de-link ourselves from the sentiments of our history, of our liberation, the sentiments of our liberation from the ANC, and craft the new path so that the South African the next South African native generation can have a better life. Because if we're still going to listen to Babu Mavuso, to Mek Maharaj, to Ace Mahashule, to Vavi, or even to Blake, this country is not going to go anywhere. Right, but Mavuso, just quick response there. I don't know if you get the thinking and how he's crafting it and putting it together. I mean, basically, what he's saying, the ANC, the organization, the leadership, they speak with forked tongues, depending on which faction is in power at that time. Support this institution today. I mean, even with this particular ruling, one ruling coming from the Constitutional Court is given a thumbs up. The next day, when the faction that is on the other side loses, the Constitutional Court is now given a thumbs down. These are the things that are bringing us to this point where we are today.
Oh, thank you very much. I mean, this is a tragic oversimplification of a very complex matter. There's absolutely no doubt that corruption has contributed a lot to the crisis that we have in the ANC and in the country. But what normally happens is that people reject a party that is not performing at the polls. It could, and I think, I'm not saying this to defend the performance of the ANC. I agree it's been in decline, and people have been registering to vote in lower and lower numbers. So that is the verdict. I'm not quite sure how else you would get rid of the ANC other than electing an alternative set of people. And that was part of the democratic system. And I, for one, and I think very many people, would accept our rejection by the people if it came to that. I just want to say, I don't quite understand what the natives are in the context of the current South Africa. I would really benefit from understanding who he talks about when he says the natives have been betrayed. But otherwise, my position is there are problems in the ANC. No one's denying them. We point them out to the best we can. We are failing assessment of Mr. Dube, but I don't think you can call my name in the same breath as Ace Mahashule's and any of the other people. I've never, ever been associated with corruption. So because there are corrupt people, the names of which he mentions, that we should all be silent and not deal with the problem. As long as the ANC exists, as long as it is elected by the people, we must try and transform it. Yeah, thank you.
Right, we take a break. We'll come back. William Booth as well as we'll come back here joining us tonight in conversation with ANC veteran Mavuso Msimang and Jama-ah President Hanif Hendricks, criminal law expert William Booth, as well as political analyst Xolani Dube. You're with us on Twitter at Newsroom405, on WhatsApp 072-110-5584. Now, William, let's bring you in here. The Constitutional Court, of course, is the one that issued this order, but the former president now taking it to the Pietermaritzburg High Court. The commission is arguing that only the Constitutional Court has the jurisdiction to grant the order that the applicant invites the court to grant in its Part A of the notice of motion. How do these things work?
Well, they're going to the Pietermaritzburg High Court to actually suspend his reporting, because he was ordered to, in fact, report today. And then if he didn't report, the police within 3 days could go and arrest Zuma. So his lawyers are approaching the Pietermaritzburg court to stop the reporting. But the interesting legal aspect is the Constitutional Court, other than ordering or finding that he was in contempt, 1, 2, sanctioning him to 15 months, 3, stated that he had to report. So that court handed down the ruling as to the reporting. So whether or not the Pietermaritzburg High Court has the jurisdiction, and I very, very much doubt it has, to overrule the Constitutional Court as to when he must report. Because the order from the Constitutional Court after this application was launched on Friday was that this rescission application be heard on the 12th of July and the various parties could file their argument, heads of argument. But nothing was said in that directive from the Constitutional Court as to when he should report and whether the reporting, and that's crucial, was in fact suspended. So I suppose it can be argued, well, the Constitutional Court, has allowed him to come back to it, which I must say I find rather strange, because although the rules may allow it, it doesn't normally happen. And it paves the way for any other litigant in the Constitutional Court when they're not happy with the decision to go back to the court.
Yeah. So tell me, right there, sorry, William, I need to come in, because the president says, well, he was asked that question, what does it mean? He says, well, you can't accept the papers and then expect me to go to jail.
Yes, no, well, look, I suppose there is some argument in that. But the papers should have requested that he be suspended from reporting until the matter be held. That is the legal correct way of dealing with it. But I suppose it can be assumed that the Constitutional Court indirectly has agreed that he doesn't report because they've allowed him to come and argue the rescission aspect. But it doesn't necessarily 100% mean that, and that's why they're looking at approaching the Pietermaritzburg High Court, and I think they're going to hear that on Tuesday, when the Constitutional Court is going to hear the rescission, as it were, aspect on the 12th of July.
Yeah. We know that a pardon is usually available in criminal matters. Is it available for civil contempt as well? And just maybe while you're there, just unpack that civil contempt and criminal contempt, and what is the vast difference there?
Now, one must remember that Zuma was a witness, so he wasn't in a criminal court where a criminal court order was handed down. So technically, it's a civil matter, but where it flows over into the criminal side of things is if you are in contempt of any court order, it can amount to a criminal offense and you can be sentenced for that. And that was interesting in the minority judgment, where Justices Jafta and Taron said that if there's a suspended sentence and he should go back to the commission, but if the commission was no longer in operation, then the matter should be referred to the national prosecuting authorities to decide whether or not he should be criminally prosecuted. So although it was civil in nature, it does have criminal elements. Even in a civil matter, if you are found to be in contempt, a criminal docket can be opened, the police can investigate, and the prosecuting authorities can then prosecute. So the minority decision was, well, that's the way it should have gone. The majority said, well, we're going to decide contempt right here and now, and we're going to sanction him at the same time. So those are interesting legal aspects. But as I said earlier, these are arguments that Zuma should have addressed previously. He should have contested all of this. So it's sort of coming after the fact. And instead of contesting it, through the court system, he then sent out various letters criticizing all the judges. So, it kind of throws it open to every litigant to say, well, this is the way I'm going to behave in future. And that is a problem, and that's why it is a slight to the rule of law. The rule of law is there for a reason. Constitutional Court was created to look after the rights of all South Africans and uphold their constitutional rights. So, we all got to comply with court rules and court orders. Otherwise, the whole country is going to, the democracy is going to fly out of the door.
Khalifa, what's your response to that? How the former president is handling this matter is actually an interference with the rule of law. But also what you're suggesting would amount to interference with the rule of law, because essentially this is a politically fraught issue. And if we bring the president in here to give a presidential pardon, we're essentially saying, well, we're having pity for a 79-year-old. President, come in here and politically manage this situation. What does that say about the rule of law?
Look, in terms of the rule of law, there is a process to get the president to apply his mind and issue a pardon. The process is that the Minister of Justice must make a submission. So Jama-ah has made certain positions to the Minister of Justice. For example, that a pardon must be granted if there's a second TRC and reparations follows and confiscation follows. So those are some of the conditions that Jama-ah has put. The president today, the former president today, has put forward a very strong case, which the Minister of Justice must also consider. The Minister of Justice, I think we will ignore the hostile narrative that the media has been pushing, in a very biased way. And I think that for this particular issue, the media, it's a plot against a country that we have such a media that is so very, very hostile, and political analysts that have one-track mind. Yeah. They're not focusing on the issue, and the issue is that there was contempt. And then contempt follows a finding. The finding was guilty, and that follows a sentence. And there, our criminal expert says that the Constitutional Court may have slipped up. So the Minister of Justice needs to take all that into account, and he needs to make a submission to the President and say, look, we dismiss Jama-ah's position. We've heard the former President Zuma ourselves. We don't recommend a pardon, or we recommend a pardon. That is where we stand at the moment. We have submitted the request to the Minister. We have also sent a ministerial question to the Minister, which he must respond to within 14 days, just in case he delays applying his mind to this application. So that's a double whammy for the Minister of Justice, and I think President Zuma's fate is now in the hand of the Minister of Justice to lay before the President of our country a submission, and the President will apply his mind. And Jama-ah feels that under the balance of probabilities, President Ramaphosa will grant him a pardon, but with certain conditions.
But would that not amount to the improper exercise of power? Never mind the fact that, first and foremost, there has to be an admission of guilt on the part of the former president before you pardon him. You can't pardon him before he admits that he was guilty.
You're telling me now that the president can't appoint his own cabinet ministers and that he's got to consider this and consider that. When it comes to a pardon, the president of a country looks at the submission of the Minister of Justice, and he makes a decision. Don't you now interfere with the rule of law?
I'm asking you a question that says, would that not be an improper exercise of power? I'm not drawing a judgment, Khanif.
No, of course not. It's the president has certain powers. And he's got a power to pardon the worst criminal in the country. He has those powers. He can appoint cabinet ministers and fire them. And then you don't have a quarrel, but now you have a quarrel.
I'm not having a quarrel. I'm asking you a question. Where is the quarrel in the question?
No, it's quite a simple thing that the president has these powers, but he exercises these powers. In the case of a pardon, he's got to wait for the Minister of Justice to make a submission. And then he looks at the submission, he applies his mind, And whatever he does, the country accepts it. So I don't know where your question comes in. It's completely irrelevant and out of place.
All right, Khadif, it might be relevant for you, quite relevant for me tonight, to find out if it would not be an improper exercise of power for a political process, clearly, that is fraught in this particular case, now bringing the president in to bring in a pardon. Xolani, talk to me, what does the situation mean in society and how it's being politically managed at this particular point?
Look, I think what's the unfolding saga in our country is doing is giving us a serious opportunity as South African citizens, just to really also go back to this constitution and see if this is a just constitution in a society where a number of people can't even afford the food basket, in a society where the G coefficient is one of the horrible ones in the world, in a society where people still live in squalors post-democracy. And so it gives us that opportunity to say, how do we interpret this constitution? Do we interpret this constitution in terms of the livelihood standard of South Africans, or we interpret this constitution in terms of any other things except the economic redistribution in our country? I think it giving us that opportunity. And moreover, it also exposes the hypocrisy of the so-called the post-1994 leaders in our country. And it also shows us that 1994 was just a phantom transition, and we inherited a phantom state. The real state is still at the hands of our historical oppressors and those who dispossess us. What was claiming to govern and what we are claiming to be in power to rule is nothing except to administrate the anger and pacify the anger of the natives. That's the role that the ANC adopted in 1994. And so right now, I think we need not to look at this issue as a Zuma issue, but we have to use it as an opportunity for us South Africans to say, what can we do in order to move forward? Because if we're going to look at it as if it is about Zuma, I can assure you, we as South Africans, we are still going to be poor and poor, especially the South African native. It's so unfortunately that Ubaba Mavuso is not knowing who's a South African native, But I can assure you that if we are not going to use this opportunity, especially young people in this country, to stand up and craft a new way for this country, we will still be in this cycle that the ANC is keep on letting us to spin, using what we call it the patronage. Because, if you see people like Ronald Lamula and those young people who are there, and you ask yourself, what differentiates them from those elders? You don't find it anymore. Young people are losing critical leaders that can shape the future of South Africa. I think young people must start to have that negotiation without the involvement of the old people who have betrayed the future of this current generation, who are at work to betray the future of the next generation.
Mavuso, let's wrap it up. The former president saying this current state, in his analysis, he says, this is my analysis, is actually worse than the apartheid state. In fact, he says, in apartheid, at least they arrested me, they gave me the sentence, whether I agreed with it or not, it was done, and that was this. This one even attacks my children, their bank accounts. They can't be hired anyway in this country. It's the worst form of punishment from a state that he's ever seen, at least in his lifetime. What's your position on that?
Well, you asked a number of questions already. I must say, if we must respond to the topic which we were invited, my understanding about this Constitutional Court judgment and the position of Zuma, the most important for me is that the supremacy of the Constitutional Court was established in its decision, in a decision being made. And that as citizens, native and otherwise, have to accept this decision. That if there are processes of challenging this, they must be pursued by all means. No one is suggesting former president should not do his options, but it was very important. It would be serious for this country if you look at it at the practical level. If the Constitutional Court were to simply withdraw because Zuma didn't like to be judged to appear before a person like Zondo, we would be in serious trouble. This happens all the time. People are not satisfied with the presiding judge, and they ask for these things, for the judge to be changed, and it's denied or not denied. If it was going to be used because this is former president, exceptionally, then we would be in serious trouble. In terms of the sentence, by the way, I think it's just establishing the principle that a decision of the Constitutional Court must be respected. Then procedures can be followed to, I thought, Thabo, you were right about pardoning a person who has accepted guilt, but I don't want to venture that area. But if it's his option and if the president thought he should be paroled, pardon, the word is, I have no problem at all with that. But it must not be done exceptional. We are all equal for the law, and the treatment must be the same. I can't remember what other question asked.
No, that pretty much covers it. I appreciate you all for coming through tonight. That is ANC veteran Mavuso Msimang, Hanif Hendricks, president of Jama-ah, William Booth, criminal law expert, as well as political analyst.